Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today to talk about destigmatizing stimming. I'm Lauren Melissa Elzey, and I am excited to talk about how we can understand and embrace autistic self regulation through destigmatizing stimming. So, I am Lauren Melissa, also known as Autinel on Instagram and other social media. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Black multiracial woman with big curly hair, medium tan skin, and I'm wearing a white shirt, and there's a white background behind me with a beautiful fake plant. In my daily life, I am an instructional support specialist, and I work alongside educators, students, and therapists to foster authentic inclusion of autistic students in classrooms. But by night, I transform into an autistic self advocate. I guess I'm a self advocate in my work too. But I am constantly working alongside many other autistic self advocates and autism advocates to empower autistic communities to embrace the inherent value of neurodiversity through autistic led support via social media activism. And so I thank you for coming today to this actually autistic conference and spending some time with me. This is how our time will be spent together. We're going to define stemming as well as the eight senses. And then we're going to connect some of those stems, some stems that we might know, and connect them to the senses. We're also going to talk about the stigma around stemming. And we'll be talking about how to invite stems into our lives, whether or not that's as an autistic person or as someone who is close to autistics. And then I'll share a little bit about my personal account with respect to stimming and my journey with embracing and destigmatizing stimming for my own self. Then we'll discuss some key takeaways and we'll have a Q&A. With the Q&A in mind, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat box. They will be collected and then sent to me at Q&A time. So any questions you have, I'll do my best to get to them at the end of the session. Let's dive in. So stem is a noun and a verb, as in I stem, I am stemming, I love my stems, and I love stemming. So stemming is self-stimulatory behavior that helps autistics, well, not just autistics, but in the framework of today's workshop, it helps autistics to process information, cope with sensory issues, or de-stress and relax. We're gonna watch a quick video. I am in this video, but it is by Blair Amani, the creator of Smarter in Seconds. And there are other autistic self-advocates in the video. It's just a quick 30-second intro into what stimming is.
Stimming,
or self-stimulatory behavior that helps the body regulate.
Stimming is commonly associated with autism, but is helpful for people across the spectrum of neurodiversity.
Stimming behavior can include fidgeting, flapping, rocking, tapping, and more.
As long as you don't harm yourself or others, stimming is a great way to regulate sensory input.
normalize stimming.
Smarter in seconds.
So that's stimming for you in a nutshell. But stimming, a lot of the time we focus on the surface. There's so much going on within. So on the surface, stimming might look like jumping up and down repetitively. It might look like dancing over and over and over again freely, sometimes called stem dancing, which is my most beloved way to stem, as well as twirling. And I was a big twirler as a kid. So I definitely see a connection between the twirling and the dancing. Stimming can also look like just listening to the same song over and over and over again on repeat. It can be echolalia or the repetition of words. A lot of the time, echolalia is defined as the repetition of spoken words. But as I'm sure many people who have been with those who use AAC to communicate, we can use different ways of repeating words to stem. And also, we can repeat words in our minds over and over and over again. No one might hear that one. Stimming is also pacing or rocking back and forth. It can be finger tapping, foot tapping, hand flapping. There's so many different ways. These are just a few that we can tap into self-stimulating behavior repetitively for a multitude of reasons. In the words of Rudy Simone, stimming is something we do to soothe ourselves when we are upset, anxious, overloaded, or in pain, to release unpleasant feelings or energy. But she also goes on to say that they happen because of an overflow of positive emotion. So, stimming is often framed as something that happens when autistics are upset. And yes, we are often feeling maybe negative emotions or having negative experiences when we stim. But we also stim when we're feeling good, when we're feeling happy, when we just are feeling an overflow of joy. And this is because underneath the surface, stimming can be a form of self regulation. So, self regulation is the process of managing one's own emotions, behavior, and thoughts, and the pursuit of a goal. This goal can be really specific, or it can be vague and just be, I want to show people that I'm happy. So, we might be managing joyful emotions and then begin jumping up and down. We might be overwhelmed by our sensory environment and begin stimming in order to kind of release those negative feelings that are building up inside the body. And self regulation, though, in general, I want to clarify, rarely comes right away. People need guidance into self regulation, and autistics are included in that through co regulation, social regulation from parents, educators, peers, you name it. So even though stimming may come naturally for many autistics, doesn't mean that we automatically can process all of our emotions and behaviors and thoughts into stimming and just go from 100 back to zero in terms of calmness through stimming. And even more importantly, stimming is communication that can show that we're uncomfortable. So if I'm stressed, anxious, or overloaded by my sensory environment, and I begin stimming, the stim might help me process my emotions, but it won't change my circumstances that I'm in. So I might continue stimming and stimming and stimming to try to help recover from maybe an ongoing loud noise that's not ending. So I might be stimming to communicate through my body. I am uncomfortable. I am in stress. But unless the loud noise stops, I can't fully come to a place of calm. So stimming isn't the end all be all. We still need to be fostering supportive environment and relationships within autistic communities. Stimming is also sensory integration. So which is the process of taking in, internalizing, and organizing information received through the eight senses. When we receive sensory input, maybe from, sight, taste, touch, our brains take that information in, make sense of it, internalizes it, and organizes it. For autistics, this can often take form in a physical or other kind of STEM way. So we might be taking in sound and STEM physically, or we might be taking in a lot of stress in our lives from loud environments or from the touch around us, an uncomfortable chair. And we might integrate that through listening to the same song over and over again to try to calm our body. This really depends on the individual autistic. And we all have individual stems that speak to our sensory needs when it comes to sensory integration. We're going to watch another little YouTube clip, not YouTube, Instagram clip that I made about just stimming and what it might look like. And giving just more and more visual examples before we dive deeper into the 8 senses and how these senses connect to stems. Even get a chance to load here.
Stimming look like? Stimming is about re-regulating after overload, stress, or maybe just feelings of joy. It's about tapping into the 7 senses. Stimming can look like this. Like that. You might be seeing a trend here. What does autistic
And that trend is that stimming can look like so many things because stimming is as vast as our 8 senses. So, thinking about the 8 senses, we have the 5 most commonly known ones: sight, or the sense, or the visual sense; hearing, or an auditory sense; touch, also known as tactile; smell, olfactory; taste, gustatory. So we might actually stem through all 5 of these senses, and we'll connect some stems to these senses in a moment. But like I said, these are just 5, and that's because there are 3 additional senses that people may or may not be familiar with. These 3 additional senses are listed here. The first one is the proprioceptive sense, which is sometimes thought of as bodiness. This sense lets us know where our body parts are and helps us plan our movements and our strength. So when we move forward to maybe grab a glass of water off the table or to push a ball across the floor, our sense of proprioception helps us gauge how much force to use and which body parts to place in what area in order to achieve that. It also is connected to compression. So whenever we feel our body parts, we can feel like this sense of like bodiness, and compression can help us locate those body parts and have a better understanding and sense of where we are and who we are in terms of bodies. We also have the vestibular sense, which is sometimes called the sense of balance. This measures head position because the vestibular sense is based in the inner ear. And it also lets us know where our bodies are in relation to gravity, movement, and balance. So the vestibular sense is kind of like what this person is doing, balancing on a ball, although that would be extremely difficult, I have to say. It helps us with knowing how to walk. It also helps us to sit in a chair because it requires balance to sit up straight in a chair. And it is often tied to the proprioceptive sense in terms of just how to move through space in general. Lastly, of these 3 kind of different senses is the interoceptive sense, which is sometimes referred to our internal sense. It tells our brains how our organs are feeling. It basically helps us to locate cues like when we need to go to the bathroom. And it also helps us understand when we're hungry or thirsty. It's often tied to our emotions as well, because our emotions often take like form through our heart rate and the blood moving in our body. And so these heart rate cues are really tied to our internal state, but also our emotional state. Thinking about bathroom cues, someone who is maybe developing or needs a lot of input into their interoception might not go to the bathroom very often or struggle to know when their body is telling them that they need to go. It might also take form in going to the bathroom all the time because we're very, very sensitive to that need. Same for hunger and thirst. We might not understand when we're hungry or we're thirsty, and that can either take form of eating and drinking all the time or rarely eating and drinking. Myself personally, I tend to drink water all day, because I can't tell when I'm thirsty. And so I just kind of overdo it. When it comes to these senses and it comes back to stimming, I just want to frame ourselves in this quote by the Chronic couple on Instagram. And this couple they're both autistic. And in this quote it says, imagine if you had an intense itch on your arm, but you were forbidden from scratching it for fear of making others uncomfortable. That's how it feels when neurodiverse people aren't allowed to stim in public. Repetitive behaviors or stimming help to comfort us, but our comfort has never been the priority. This has to change. So, as we dive into stems and how we connect these stems to the senses, let's think about how we can embrace these in our lives in order to destigmatize that we should just hide these needs, but to actually prioritize these needs and to normalize stimming so that comfort can be easily accessed in neurodiverse communities. So, as we connect the stems to senses, I have some examples. The first example here is sight and sound. So, if we're listening to music, maybe the same song on repeat over and over again, we have a visualization, maybe like one of those cool music visualizers, or even just a music video, we're tapping into the auditory and visual sense. And so we could do that over and over and over again, embracing audio visual and coming to a place of calm or balance within ourselves and our bodies. We also have here an example of touch and bodiness in the form of a weighted blanket. So, soft weighted blankets are a way to explore proprioception and the tactile. The softness helps us tap into that sense of touch, and the weightedness helps to provide compression and balance us back into our bodies. Then we can combine the senses of smell and taste when we eat spicy foods or food with strong flavors. So, this can be a lot of sensory joy. Even just the smell of the spices can be so exciting. And then the taste as well can bring on so many like feelings, like spicy food, warms up your whole body. And this can be a way of stemming and exploring your senses. Whenever I eat, I need strong flavors in order to turn that into like a sensory experience. And I really feel that very vividly. So we also have a common stem, which is oral motor activity. This could be chewing on pens, chewing on gum, chewing on our nails, anything that, or chewing on jewelry. Jewelry is a great new fidget toy that, not new, but fidget toy that is being used more often, I should say. And this sort of stimming may tap into proprioceptive and touch senses as well. And that's because it adds compression into the mouth. And also, there are different textures that are in the mouth that could be very stimulating. And there have been studies done on oral motor activity, and it's been proven to actually increase frustration tolerance. So, if a person is feeling stressed and begins to stim through oral motor activity, it really can decrease the stress and increase our ability to push through challenges. I mean, we've all kind of, maybe we haven't all, but I think we've often been there where we have to sit through a meeting or sit through something that is uncomfortable and we start biting on our pen or chewing our nails or pop some gum to stay focused. And those are prime examples of that. And we've got, the twirling and the rocking and the jumping. And these stems generally tap into the vestibular sense of balance. When we see someone twirling and twirling, they're feeling their body and its movement through space. And when we feel these senses, we have this desire to move vestibularly, or maybe we have a desire to smell things, or a desire for oral motor activity, or for taste. It's best to lean into that because it's our bodies trying to tell us that we need more of that sensory input to integrate and feel at balance. And so to try to push that down and not lean into it, it leaves our bodies feeling bereft of the sense that it is desiring. And we want to actually give our bodies what they need in this instance. So if we need to twirl, if we need to rock, we need to jump, holding it in creates so much stress in ourselves. And the flip side of it is to let it out. And we feel so much more balance, joy, or frustration tolerance. So it's really these two sides that are hold it in and feel frustrated, let it out and feel better. So that's why what's one of the many reasons why it's so important to destigmatize stimming and give us access to that self-regulation. Stimming should be seen as autistic body language. In the same way that non-autistic people have signs for happiness, such as smiling, and sadness, such as frowning, autistic people also have signs. They just might look a bit different. It may not look the same as neurotypical body language, but it is just as natural and important. Now, we've heard people say when you're crying, when someone cries, they're sad. When someone smiles, they're happy. We don't often hear when this person is tapping their chest, they're sad. When this person is twirling, they're happy. But for autistics, that's our body language for many of us. We're expressing ourselves. And then to say, no, 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 don't do that. We can't have you doing that. Please put that away. When you're happy, smile instead. It's very frustrating and disorienting and confusing. It's like saying my emotions need to be locked up and I have to express them in this other way, not for my comfort, but for others. So then that tells me that my emotions belong to others and they don't belong to me. That is a really difficult way to walk through life. And it can be as simple as just saying, it's okay to twirl when you're happy, to really begin the stepping stones of autistic acceptance and autistic inclusion. I keep going the wrong way. So, why do we have this stigma against stimming? What's going on here? Well, I think we've touched on a lot of it. It has a lot to do with comfort, but there are a lot of reasons for there to be stigmas against stimming and for ableism in this way to manifest. One of the things I commonly hear that's said, I do believe out of a place of good intent, is I want autistics to make friends. And we hear this a lot with young autistics in school. And if they stem in the classroom, everybody's going to think they're strange and they're not going to want to talk to them. I really want to pause here and say that maybe that makes sense in a short term, making friends in this is super important mindset. But at the same time, by telling people to stop stimming so they can make friends, because people will think they're weird if they stem, that's kind of blaming the person who is being ostracized for their ostracization. And the focus can really be on, instead of telling autistics to stop stemming, it can be on normalizing stemming and having conversations with non autistics and neurotypical individuals that stimming is okay. And we all move our bodies in different ways. And that's all right. I don't really think that the onus should be on autistics to stop being themselves in order to make friends. What that teaches us, and this is something that I learned, and we'll get into my personal account later on, is that in order to make friends, I cannot be myself. And if I'm not myself and I'm making friends, then in order to keep my friends, I have to pretend to be someone that I'm not. And that I'm only valuable as a friend if I'm not who I am. And that messaging is very clear to autistics from a young age when we're told to do a variety of things. And one of those things that we're told to do is stop stemming. The next thing that I want to address is self injurious stimming, which is real. I'm not going to be here and say that self injurious stimming is not a thing. It is a thing. And I myself have experienced it in many ways. And self-injurious stimming still needs to be explored through autistic-led studies and through studies that really focus on autism acceptance. As it stands, most self-injurious stimming studies are done more in a way that embraces trying to make autistics less autistic. And it's really sad because I do think that self-injurious stimming needs to be looked at and talked about and explored and discussed because it's about livelihood in a lot of ways. A few things I want to say, though, on the topic of self-injurious stimming is that it often manifests when other forms of stimming have been repressed. So if I'm told that I can't, in an example of myself, suck my fingers because it's weird and I need to grow out of it, as many told me, I still need that oral motor stimulation. It's not going to go away. So what did it turn into? It turned into nail biting. And then I was told to stop biting my nails. So what did that turn into? Well, I have to find a way to do this stim to get this oral motor activity. And gum chewing's not okay in school. And I've been told to stop destroying my pens, all of these things. So what did I start doing? I started taking my nails and I started cutting my gums with them. And it was really painful. But my body needed a way to express that need for proprioceptive and touch input through oral motor stimulation. Now, this could have all just gone back to the beginning, and my stems could have been more embraced in their original form. But as I tried to hide these stems, they became secret and they became self injurious. So I definitely want to just bring up that embracing stimming, I believe, will reduce the amount of self-injurious stims we see. And I used myself as an example because self-injurious stimming is very personal and it's not something that I want to put a general blanket around. And of course, there are self-injurious stims that could be life-threatening. But like I said, this is why more autistic-led, autistic-focused, acceptance-focused studies need to go on so we can really figure out what's happening in individuals' environments, what's happening in individuals' circumstances, what's happening societally in terms of ableistic systems, so we can mitigate and transform so that our bodies are safer in society. Lastly, when it comes to stigma around stimming, I want to talk about the intersection of ableism and racism. So stimming, right? It's thought of as strange, weird, ungeneral in this general society's view, something that should be stopped, something that makes others uncomfortable. Now, when someone is a person of color, though, and they stim in public, and this happens to non-people, to people who are not of color as well, but I want to say that this is especially palpable for BIPOC autistics. When we stim in public, we're often quickly viewed as dangerous because Black and Brown bodies in general are typically viewed as more dangerous. When we stim and do things with our bodies that make others uncomfortable, we are viewed as additionally dangerous. And there are many accounts of Black and Brown autistics being taken into custody, arrested, or their lives being put in danger due to people's misperceptions around stimming, their misunderstandings around stimming, and viewing autistics as dangerous when we stim. Additionally, if autistics are not permitted to stim, we are very, very much at risk for meltdowns and shutdowns because we have so much going on inside of our bodies, all of this stress, all of this emotion, all of these sensory things going on. We might have a meltdown or a shutdown. And when BIPOC autistics have meltdowns, we are also additionally viewed as dangerous and our lives are put at risk. So we really need to work on destigmatizing stimming for the comfort of our bodies, for the goodness of our social relationships, These stigmas exist and they are very harrowing for us. And so much of it could just be put away if we just allow for freedom of bodily movement and embracing and understanding that when we stem, we are self regulating and we can still see and hear what's going on around us when we're stemming. And we'll get a little bit to stemming in the classroom and paying attention in the classroom in a moment. But I'll pause here with that. Right. So now that we know a lot about the senses and we are thinking more about stems and thinking about the importance of destigmatizing STEM, let's take a second here to talk about how we can invite stems into our lives. And for many autistics, we have heard the narrative of stop stimming in one way or another, whether or not that's structurally, whether or not that's socially and non-verbally being told through weird looks and head shakes and people being embarrassed by us being ourselves. But autistics have gotten the message. Many of us have. And so, as we maybe want to explore STEMs and explore self regulation, it's not something that any of us can just turn on again right away or start doing throughout our days as a form of preemptive self regulation. Reclaiming STEMs can really be a journey. And it's okay to try out STEMming. It's okay to copy STEMs, to see someone doing a STEM and trying that for ourselves. That is totally okay to do. You're not being fake, you're not being phony. It's just trying out something and seeing what works and fits for us and what stems feel best in our bodies. I also want to bring up that many of us have also internalized ableism, not just to ourselves and our stems, but in seeing other people stem. And one thing that I had to do as I reclaimed stems in my life was I had to look at other people stemming and I had to encounter and confront my own thoughts about it looking weird or it looking strange because that's what I'd been taught. But the more and more I looked at stemming and the more and more I started thinking about my own mindsets around it and whether or not they were true or whether or not they were ableism, I started being able to embrace stemming in my life. I would have never thought 5 years ago that I would stem on a camera and put that on social media. And it has been a journey to get to that place. And I'm really proud of that journey, but it is a hard one. So if there are any autistics in here, who are thinking about reclaiming stems, I just want to say be patient with yourself. It's okay. Then, for families that are looking to integrate STEMs into their lives on a more intentional level, I want to invite you to observe STEMs and the STEMs and the senses that your children prefer or your family members prefer, and invite new ways of exploring those senses. Begin that co regulation with them and say, I noticed that you might be a little uncomfortable right now. I know that you love smelling things. Do you want to spend some time smelling these essential oils with me? And invite that relationship into co regulating with our family members. It can be a beautiful experience and really build up positive building blocks of self regulation later on. And lastly, for educators in the classroom, we can normalize class-wide acceptance of differences in bodies and movement and incorporate fidgets into the classroom. We can hold class meetings talking about differences. If someone points out another person's stemming, we can say, yeah, that's what they do to make their body feel better. We all have different things to make our bodies feel better. And move on. It might seem it might seem overwhelming at first or scary to have those conversations, but the more we do it, the more comfortable we can become. And we might find that when we incorporate fidgets into the classroom, all your students will be wanting to use them. It helps us to focus in the class. Maybe our eyes aren't on the screen or our eyes aren't on the teacher. Maybe we're rocking, maybe we're tapping, maybe we're using a pop-it fidget. That's okay. We listen in different ways. And recognizing that our eyes don't have to be on the screen to be listening, or our bodies don't have to be still, is a beautiful thing. It can really invite neurodiversity into the classroom. I want to just talk a little bit about my own personal journey with stimming before we head into key takeaways in the Q&A. So in the beginning, when I was little, and yes, that is mini me, back when I was 5 years old, I believe. By the way, Disneyland is one of my favorite places in the world. And it began when I was 5. I also think I kind of still look like that, which is weird because a lot of people are like, I look so different now, but I think I look like that. But when I was young, I had so many joyful stems. I'd spin and spin and spin and spin until I got dizzy. I would suck my fingers when I was joyful, when I was sad. I actually remember telling my dad once, I suck my fingers when I am happy, and I do it when I'm sad, and I do it when I'm nervous, and sometimes I do it when I'm mad, and sometimes I do it when I'm bored too. And my dad said, so you do it all the time? And I was like, well, it just helps me all day. And I would jump up and down when I was excited. And I just had all these different ways of regulating my body. And then I vividly remember around the time I was in the second grade, I was told I need to stop sucking my fingers. And I've already talked about that journey that turned into nail biting and then a self-injurious stem. I didn't actually stop sucking my fingers until the fifth grade. And I remember people were telling me that I needed to do it because in middle school, people would make fun of me for sucking my fingers. So that was my motivation to stop stimming so that people wouldn't make fun of me. Then, when I was in the sixth grade, I remember in PE, I was playing volleyball. And every time my team scored a point, I would jump up and down and clap my hands. And then my classmates started imitating me and making fun of me and asking me why I did that. I didn't even realize I was doing it until they pointed it out. So I stopped doing it and I stopped. And then from that point forward, whenever my team scored a point, I got scared that I would jump up and down. So I would cross my arms and hold my body tight. I didn't want to be made fun of. So over time, I started, for many other reasons with relation to my autism and being bullied, really falling into self-injurious stems, which I described before. But I also did used to hit myself repeatedly. And I would do these things in secret. And I would tell myself that people didn't like me. That's what I would tell myself on repeat over and over again as a stem. Nobody likes me. Nobody likes me. As I did these self-injurious stems. And then finally, when I was an adult, I received my autism diagnosis. And it changed my life. This was 7 years ago. I began to realize that there was something different about me. Yes, I already knew that, but it wasn't bad, and that I could embrace myself, and that I had difficulties with processing the sensory environments around me, but that I could control my sensory environments. I could stimulate myself through stemming. I could dance wildly, and I could twirl, and I could become balanced in my body. And that was liberating. And I started reclaiming these stems. And I have to say that I'm so much more happy and so much more balanced as I explore my senses in these ways and as I self regulate in ways that work for me. If I'm at a party and I'm overwhelmed, I start tapping my chest. And if someone doesn't want to be my friend because of that, I don't want to be their friend because they're a kind of person that makes fun of people for self regulating and by tapping their chest. Of course, I would like to just get to a point, though, where people understand that these bodily differences and this neurodiversity is natural. So that's why I'm here today. And this is a bit of my personal mission when it comes to stimming. So as we close out our time and get ready to do the Q&A here today, I just want to pause with some key takeaways. Stimming is a way to tap into the eight senses in order to self-regulate. That's what it is in its primary form. There are other reasons for stimming, But when it comes down to it, this is where it is in the beginning. And this is where it is in terms of self-regulation for autistics. Stimming is also communication of our needs, of our wants, of our joys, of the full breadth of emotions. And we can be aware of the stigmas around stimming and actively take a look at them, fight against them, and still find ways to embrace Stims and not blame autistics for the stigma, but join us in fighting those stigmas. So thank you for being with me here today. And if there are any questions or thoughts or wonders, I would like to discuss them now for the next 20 or 30 or so minutes. Again, I think the questions are getting sent over. Can knuckle cracking be a stim? Is a question. And yeah, definitely think about that. I mean, we can all do this. We can all do this together for a moment. Take your hands. You don't actually have to crack your knuckles if that makes you uncomfortable. Just take your hand, put your hand on top of your finger and press. Press each finger lightly. That is compression. That is the proprioceptive sense, getting a sense of our fingers back. And doing it over and over again can certainly be a stim. Now, another question, and please feel free to keep asking questions in the chat box. I'll also revisit my personal story as well if we have pauses in these questions. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. Someone asked, I work with a student whose parents request we stop stimming. I've tried to explain the positive self-regulatory benefits of stimming to them, but they refuse to accept it. Do you have any advice for parents who want to actively stop their child's stimming? I want to first name that I am not a parent. I've been an educator and I've worked with students across all ages from infants through 12th grade. And I currently still support students in the classroom in my role, but that is not the same as being a parent. And each parent's personal experience with their child is different. And each child's stims are different. And so I just want to start by saying that because I don't want to assume a parent's experience of raising their child. But I will answer this question. Advice for parents who want to actively stop their child's stimming. And I would just invite parents to take some time to really sit down and maybe journal why they want their child to stop stimming and to assess if any of those reasons might be more for others' comfort than for their child's comfort. I am also aware that oftentimes parents might receive pressure from the education system to make their children stop stimming in the classroom. And if that is happening, and that is one of the reasons why we're pursuing to stop your child stimming, I 100% support you advocating to that school to stop being exclusionary towards your child and to take action because schools are supposed to be safe spaces for all people, regardless. I hate the word regardless, but I'm using the school lingo, regardless of disability. And you can 100% fight for your child's right to stim in the classroom. I want to address that as well, if that is a reason why you may be actively trying to stop your child stimming. And for those who are working with parents around this topic, I invite that conversation of saying why and really listening to why parents are wanting their child to stop stimming and listen and listen and listen, and then figure out if there's a way that we can support their whole family. So that's my advice around that topic. Right. So another question that was asked is, I'm a parent. Hello, parent. When my son's stimming starts, he is first very happy, but soon becomes obsessed and cannot let it go. He stims when he stims with playing with wires and cords by scratching them across surfaces. Can we do something about not turning happy stims to obsessive compulsive? So I'm going to think hard about this because if a person cannot, I'm first struggling with the phrase cannot let it go. And I'm also struggling with the word obsessed, just because that is subjective, and I'm not sure what your son is doing that makes it obsessive, other than just a continuation of the repetitive activity that is helping your son or your child to find balance with the sensory experience. So if he's actually showing physical pain because of the stem, I would suggest at that point offering another way to do the same stem, or like to get input into the same sense. So playing with wires and cords and scratching them across surfaces sounds like it could potentially, and I'm not an occupational therapist, so I would recommend talking to an occupational therapist. I'm speaking from my experience as an autistic person who also works in autistic spaces with supporting autistic children, but I myself am not an OT. Wires and cords and scratching them across surfaces sounds like it could be tactile as well as auditory. And that scratching sound might be inviting for some reason. But it also might be an indicator that there's a sound in the space that he is trying to cover up. So sometimes we stim auditorily to replace an auditory sound. It's just redundant, but to replace a sound that is bothering us. So I would also look into the environment and the sounds in the environment and see what's going on there. But I would also look for other ways to explore sound and touch at the same time with your child. And I would explore those not in the heat of the moment, but at a separate time where he is just like having a nice little neutral time. And then taking sound and touch with like, surfaces that are similar to wires and cords, and then maybe putting on some headphones if he can wear headphones, or playing some music that might be kind of strange to us, but filling in a joy for him, like some ambient sounds, and see how your child responds to that. So I would say first try exploring additional stems that might meet his sensory needs, and then swapping through those stems. So that way he can explore them in multiple ways instead of like focusing in on the one singular stem, and see if there's something else that's meeting his need. And then, of course, lastly, always exploring the sensory environment and also exploring what's going on socially before he starts the stem. I hope that's helpful. I think that was probably a lot of information, but I hope that that is helpful as a jumping off point. So the next question that I'm going to look up is also about a child. Is stimming why my son seems to be more regulated when he's been swimming in water? I've not only noticed that it calms him, but his expressive language significantly increases immediately after being in the pool. It's beautiful. Yeah, definitely swimming can be a stem in so many ways. Our bodies are moving, our sense of balance is different in water. And also, like, water can be like a tactile thing that's enjoyable, as well as a compression thing that's enjoyable when we're fully immersed. So if your child is enjoying the water and then he seems to come out of it being more expressive and more joyful or just more balanced in some ways. So continue exploring that with him and continue exploring water in general. Water is beautiful. The sound of water can also be something that any autistics really enjoy. So I'm glad that you're seeing that connection. And I hope you continue to explore that sensory joy of your child. Another question that's being asked is, do you have any resources for families to help connecting stimming to senses so that we can invite new ways to explore these senses? Some stimming seems to incorporate multiple senses, as you stated. It can sometimes be hard to determine which senses connect to the stem when multiple senses are involved. I don't have any specific resources to hand out that connect stems to senses. I would say connect with an OT. They might have a lot of, or occupational therapists. They might have some additional resources around connecting stems to senses. I would also recommend just connecting it for yourself. I think a lot of people, because of the ways our brains just automatically sensory integrate for many human beings, we don't actually notice the sensory experiences throughout our day. So I would recommend for families, not necessarily the autistic child, although mindfulness and meditation can be helpful for autistics in general. I would recommend for families that are trying to explore this to grow their own mindfulness practice and to, whenever we're sitting in an environment, maybe take a moment to feel the environment with our sense of touch, smell the environment, and listen to the environment. And then, like, feel how balanced we are in the environment. Think about what's touching us and where our body parts are as we sit in the environment and our internal state in that environment, and grow our own awareness of it. And then when we see our children or the autistic adults that we know stimming, we might start to think of what their bodies might be experiencing during that stim. And then we might start to think about the other things that could connect. And then just explore, introduce. It sounds weird to be like, have a sensory time. But I think that that's so valuable to just sit down and have sensory time, sensory play, sensory exploration. I'm an adult and I still do sensory play all the time. I love it. Adults go to concerts. That is sensory play. A concert is sensory play. Um, Painting and pottery, that's sensory play. So just incorporating and trying out new ways of sensory play and then journaling and asking ourselves, what senses do these connect to? Yeah, definitely. I was just at this place the other day, and there was like a nature trek there. And it was supposed to be like a sensory adventure. And I signed up for that in 2 seconds. And I got to explore my sense of balance on bridges. I got to explore touch on multiple surfaces. And after I walked out of it, I felt great. And the person I went with, who's allistic, they're not autistic, they felt great. So just keep exploring and thinking about it intentionally. And then if you want specific resources, connect to an occupational therapist. But even those resources will take time to internalize. All right. Next question. Can you talk about stems that might not be compatible with the learning environment? And then someone else asked a question that's similar. So I'm going to answer both of these at the same time. My son has a lot of verbal stems, like repeating the same things, making noises, and laughing continuously. This can be disruptive in a classroom. What can I suggest the school do? I love this question. So I'm going to get to the verbal stems kind of towards the tail end of this question because I want to just start off talking about the greater question of Stims that might not be compatible with the learning environment. So what's the purpose of a learning environment? To build a space where people can learn. If we have students that need to STEM in certain ways in our learning environment, and we're saying it's not compatible, then we're actually putting the onus on the student to adapt to an environment instead of the environment adapting to students to help them learn. I studied a specific form of education practice in early childhood called the Regionalia Philosophy. I'm not going to get super into this philosophy, but in this philosophy, there are multiple teachers in the classroom. There's students as teacher, teacher as teacher, families as teacher. But the third teacher, actually, before one of those, is the environment. And what is our environment teaching us? And what is our environment teaching our autistic students? For the most part, our environments are teaching autistic students that they don't belong. Our environments are teaching autistic students that they have to sacrifice their sensory needs to learn. And so when we ask if a STEM is not compatible with a learning environment, we really want to ask why our learning environment isn't compatible for STEMming. And that's a big question. And it's a lot easier to tell an autistic student to stop STEMming than to have conversations with students around them about bodies and movement and differences, and to build that into our society and into our education framework. And it's a lot easier to tell a student to stop stimming than to sit down in our classroom and look at it and think, are our lights too bright? Are these chairs ridiculously uncomfortable? Do we have fidgets available? Do we have directions clearly stated on the board, written out, or with visuals so that students are less confused and therefore more comfortable? What are the students communicating when they're stimming? And so if we first make our environments more sensorially comfortable, and then we secondly have conversations around bodies and movements and differences, then we can really start to understand and think about what compatibility is. I understand as teachers, it can be really hard to make our classrooms transformed in this way. We have hard jobs, but our job is for the students. And let us never lose the students and other things. So then the related question was about verbal stims, like repeating the same thing or making noises and laughing continuously, and how this could be disruptive in a classroom. So once again, not going to repeat everything I just said over again, but really, like, we might ask the school like what they're doing to support autistic students. What is the room like? Is it sensorially comfortable? If a child is making lots of verbal stems, that is often a sign that they're covering up other noises. It's like kind of ironic, right? Because there could be a noisy classroom and then a child starts making noises because it's noisy, and then that contributes to the noise, and it's like a never ending loop. So I would say first figuring out like what the sensory environment is in the classroom, how the child can be supported through transitions that are noisy. If maybe different children enjoy noise cancellation, headphones or earbuds, if music in the background, soft music could be helpful, things like that. So my first thing is before we look at the STEM, look at the environment. After that, if the teachers are still saying that the STEM is so disruptive, even if they've had conversations with the other students and all of those things, I would say like trying to find like other like noise makers that are quieter too. Maybe if it's a sound thing, like fidget pops could be helpful. Just exploring a lot of different ways of enjoying auditory stimulation and looking for a multiplicity of ways. Not to make it so that the verbal stem never happens, but so that the child has more options on how to get the input that they need. And I think that has to be a big question to ask the classroom. Are we saying that my child can never make verbal stems? When is it actually safe or comfortable for my child to verbally stem in this room? Has the educator thought about times of day that it's happening more often? Things like that. And who is actually uncomfortable with the verbal stem? Is it actually the other students that are uncomfortable? Or is it the educator that is uncomfortable because it feels like the child's not focusing? Having these real conversations with the school first to set that foundation is a beautiful way to advocate for your child's needs. Okay, so I have another question here. I think I can answer maybe this question and two more before we roll up end up our time together here today. So please continue to ask questions if you have any. I worked with a woman who scratched herself. Oh, I should have done a trigger warning on this one. Trigger warning and self-injurious stems in detail as well. I worked with a woman who scratched herself till she would bleed. She is stimming. Is there a way to redirect someone to a healthier stem? Okay. So this woman, once again, I know I feel like I keep saying this over and over and over again, but since stems are connected to the senses, we have got to see what's going on sensorially around autistics before we talk about their stem, right? So, like, what is happening that is causing that is bringing about this stem? Stems are not, what's the word? Random. Stems are not purposeless, regardless of how they might look on the surface to someone observing. Stems have purpose and stems are not random. So this person who's scratching themselves, there's a reason for their stem, just like there's a reason for a stem that's rocking back and forth. So I would say, while we might look for ways to redirect this stem to a healthier stem, we first have to figure out why, right? Because the why is so important for safety for autistics. I'm not saying that if an environment is sensorially perfect, the autistics would never stem. I love stemming and I hope I never stop. Like I said, I stem when I'm happy. So, like, I'm going to stem. But for stems like these, like self-injurious stems, we've really got to stop and take a look at the situation, the environment, the circumstances first. After that, we might see then if it's a scratch, that sounds like it could be proprioceptive. Once again, I'm not an OT. It could be proprioceptive. So if it's a proprioceptive or touch need, we can try compression, like weighted blankets, or if sometimes tight material can be sensorily painful, but we can see like if like compression shirts, like workout shirts, could be helpful for giving that sense of bodiness, for that groundingness. If my body is here, it's in this moment. Squeezing can be helpful for compression along the arms, along the legs. It is still entirely possible, given that this is an adult who has probably been suppressing stems, that this stem is been used as a replacement stem for something that could be completely unrelated. So I would also think through how often this person is able to do other stems. Are there other stems in this person's life that they're already leaning into? And sorry, I was doing this because I'm not going to apologize, but I was doing this because it's one of my stems. Like if there's other stems that this person could feel more positively about, like that we could support that feeling, go for that. Build up that positivity around stimming. Not try not to focus too much on the negative. Like, remember, you got to stop that stem. You got to stop that stem. Like, what other stems do you love? Let's talk about how great those are. Let's talk about how wonderful those experiences can be and build up positivity around stimming because negative feelings around stimming can lead to self-injurious stimming. Definitely. And I'm going to use myself once again as an example for that. So I used to like get really excited in STEM and like maybe like have a really happy conversation where maybe I was talking about one of my special interests and I'd be like, this is so great. I'm having such a good time. And then I'd walk away from it. And then all the words, all the people who had told me that I was bad would come flooding in. You talked too much. You're so loud. Nobody cares. You are annoying. This is why you don't have any friends. And so I would feel shame about myself and my autism. And then I would start self injuriously stimming as a way to try to cope with that stress. So it's a very complicated topic, but basically, to finalize what I said in that question, observe the environment, situation, and circumstances. Try to build in a more positive feeling around stimming in that person's life and the people around that person. And then lastly, see if compression stems help. And maybe they will. Maybe that's what it is. You know? And of course, continue conversations with the autistic individual about how they're feeling around the whole process and get their feedback about what they might think would help. Yeah. So I think I have time for one more question. That question is maybe two, maybe two. We'll see if I can breeze through these last two. What is your advice to parents who have their own cultural biases about stimming? They just want their kids to stop because it's annoying. Hmm. You know, I'm not sure if that parent exists. Like if there's a parent that literally only wants they're like totally okay with every other thing about stimming and they just find it annoying. Um, because I feel like if they find it annoying, like there's like probably more things that they need to learn about stimming. But just to address that sometimes stimming can be annoying to others, like that is a real thing. And also sometimes like stims can come, like sensory needs can come into like conflict with each other. Like maybe someone stims a lot by shaking their leg, but like that shakes another person's body next to them. And that person like has a lot of vestibular things going on. And like, so they can't work with that stem, being like on a couch with that person. So I would say like, if a stem is like annoying a person, like someone rocking and you're like, oh my gosh, stop the rocking. Like just like move your body so that way the stimming is not like right in front of you. So you can take care of your own, like maybe it's visually difficult. So you can take care of your own needs. I think like we all need to just find ways to like take ownership for the things that are bothering us and learn how to cope with that, especially as adults in this realm of like you move your body in a way I don't like it, but like we're all moving our bodies in ways that maybe other people don't enjoy. And so finding ways to monitor ourselves and give ourselves breaks. If our child is like doing verbal stims and that's really like irking a person, why doesn't that person put noise cancellation earphones on? You know, like it's not always the autistic person that has to put the noise cancellation earbuds or earphones on. So I hope that was helpful. And then I'll take this last question. I am a 22-year-old autistic woman. Do you think autistic people should be allowed to STEM at work? I don't know how to go about getting accommodations for work and not to feel like an other because of my STEM. And there were just like general questions around advocating for self at work in general. Let's talk about the STEMs in this last time. I'm going to try to wrap this up here in a magical 3 minutes. And she do it. Um, the workplace is really frustrating in a lot of ways because technically we're supposed to be covered by the ADA, but bias exists, right? So, one, do I think autistic should be allowed to STEM at work? 100% yes. Work is so stressful, has so many sensory environmental problems, like from lighting to chairs to meetings to like who knows what. And if we are expected to work through that, like the baseline should be that autistics can STEM at work. But then how do we ask for those accommodations? You know, I wouldn't even phrase it as an accommodation to be able to STEM. Like everybody should be able to STEM at work. I don't think that it's an accommodation. Like I need an accommodation to rock back and forth. Like an accommodation is something that your workplace has to like put in place for you. Like they don't have to put in place stimming. It just is happening. But of course, at the end of the day, how do we do that? If you are comfortable with your employer or with your HR office, maybe talking to them about making the environment more supportive for bodies and bodily movement and incorporating fidgets, incorporating discussions around that. I would say like it's something to advocate for, like especially if your company or wherever you're working is already doing conversations around diversity, if they have like diversity professional developments and workshops here and there, specifically requesting that autism and neurodiversity get included in those workshops is a great way to start. You can have conversations with your employer that use STEM and that it's just something you do to help you focus, to help you get along in a sensory environment. And just tell them, I don't think that we need to ask for permission. And if your employer makes a request after you're stimming to please stop, that's what the ADA is for. And I do believe in legal action against workplaces because it is a reasonable accommodation to stim at work. It's beyond reasonable. It costs them nothing. So yeah, that's where I would say that's what I would say for that. You know, starting small and then if it gets big, looking into organizations. I think you can connect with some autism organizations to find support in getting legal action taken. Yeah. Well, I think it's time. I did it. It's 12:59. I really appreciate all of you being with me here today for this really invigorating Q&A and for talking with me about destigmatizing stimming. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today. And if you're looking to connect with me further, feel free to follow me on Instagram, send me a DM at Autianel. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.